They say a mother's love has no limits. I used to believe that too, until mine was tested, stretched, and finally shattered by the one person I would have given my life for. My name is Eleanor Whitmore, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes revenge isn't about destroying others. It's about rebuilding yourself so beautifully that they can never look away from what they lost. My daughter Christina was my pride and joy. From the moment she was born, she filled every empty space in my heart. I raised her alone after her father passed away, built a business from the ground up, managed our estate, and ensured she never wanted for anything. She grew up surrounded by silk sheets, piano lessons, and the scent of gardenias from our courtyard in Connecticut. I thought that love, comfort, and stability would protect her from the cruelty of the world. I was wrong. When Christina met Jason, everything began to change. He was charming, well-dressed, and ambitious, the kind of man who knew how to make people trust him. He called me Mom. From the second month they were dating, bringing me flowers and asking for advice about his career. I liked him at first. He reminded me of my late husband, polite, driven, and attentive. But beneath that smooth surface was something I couldn't quite name until it was too late. The wedding was beautiful. I paid for everything. The marble venue, the orchestra, even the honeymoon to Santorini. I didn't mind. It made me happy to see her happy. After all, isn't that what mothers live for? But soon after they moved into my guest house, subtle shifts began. Christina grew distant. Our morning teas turned into awkward silences. Jason started handling all of her financial matters. Her accounts, even her inheritance. When I asked why, she said, "Mom, Jason's better at that stuff. You've done enough for me." Her tone stung, but I smiled through it, convincing myself it was just part of her growing independence. Then came the day that changed everything. I'd gone to check on them after not hearing from her for a week. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. As I walked through the living room, I saw a letter on the table. My name on the envelope, written in Christina's handwriting. I opened it, and the words burned straight through me. "Mom, we've decided to move to Florida. Jason got a job offer there, and it's time for us to start our own life. Please don't try to contact us for a while. We need space. I love you." I sank into the chair, my hands shaking. No goodbye, no visit, no hug, just a note. For months I didn't hear from her. Then, one afternoon, I got a call from the bank. My joint account, the one I had opened years ago to help her with emergencies, was almost empty. Hundreds of thousands of dollars gone. When I called Christina, she didn't pick up. When I called again, Jason answered. "Eleanor," he said coldly, "it was all a misunderstanding. Christina needed the money for an investment. You'll get it back." But I knew then, I never would. I spent that night sitting by the window, staring at the lights of the city, feeling like a fool. All those years of sacrifice, the love, the trust, they had drained me dry and left me with nothing but humiliation. I cried until dawn, not just for the money, but for the daughter I had lost to greed. That was the moment something in me shifted. For the first time in decades, I realized I had lived my entire life for someone else. I had given Christina everything, even pieces of myself I could never get back. And now that she'd taken everything, there was nothing left to lose. That kind of emptiness can either destroy you or set you free. So I made a choice. I would rise again, but not as the naive mother who loved blindly. No, I would become someone new, someone Christina wouldn't even recognize. And my revenge, it wouldn't be loud or cruel. It would be silent, elegant, and undeniable. I would build a life so magnificent that she'd have to face what she'd thrown away. That night, I opened a new account under my own name. I started making calls to old contacts, business partners, friends who still respected me. By morning, I had a plan. If Christina and Jason thought they could erase me, they were about to learn what happens when you underestimate a woman who's been broken but refuses to stay that way. Because I wasn't finished. Not even close. The night after I sat by the window and vowed I would not be defeated, I slept for the first time in weeks without waking in the middle of the night to replay every betrayal. Morning felt like a small, private victory. The grief was still there, a steady, patient ache, but it no longer had the power to make me small. I walked into my study, sat at my desk that had survived 3 generations of Whitmores, and made a list. Not of errands, but of actions. Revenge, I decided, would begin with order. First, secure what was mine. I called an old friend, Martin Hale, who had been my father's business partner decades ago and who still ran a modest investment firm. Martin did not judge me for asking for help. He only asked one question: "What do you want, Eleanor?" I told him, as simply and clearly as I could, to be untouchable. He laughed, but there was respect beneath it. By noon, he had introduced me to a lawyer who specialized in elder law and protective measures. By evening, I had a meeting with Michael Turner. Calm, efficient, and eyes that gave nothing away. I liked him immediately. Michael listened while I told him the facts. A joint account drained, a daughter who had turned cold and distant, a man who sounded practiced in excuses. He asked about powers of attorney, property deeds, and any documents Christina might have access to. I found myself telling him more than I had told anyone. There was something strangely liberating about speaking the truth aloud and having a professional map out the remedies like a surgeon planning an operation. Within 24 hours, Michael had prepared paperwork to revoke any powers Christina might hold, to freeze any questionable transfers pending investigation, and to change keys and codes to accounts and properties. He suggested we move quickly. Decisive action would both stop further theft and send a message. I signed. It felt like closing a wound with steady hands. But securing assets was only the beginning. The deeper work would be quieter and more subtle. I had to rebuild a public story that was mine, not the narrative Christina had tried to write. For too long I had allowed myself to be reduced to a supporting role in her life. It was time to take center stage, not with fury, but with dignity. I began with my image. To the outside world, I was Eleanor Whitmore, widow, philanthropist, woman of taste. But private affairs whispered a different story: a woman taken advantage of, left vulnerable. I did not want pity, and I certainly didn't want spectacle. I wanted respect. I hired a small team, a solicitor to handle the legal side, Martin's referral for a discreet accountant, and a publicist, a young woman named Leela who understood how to craft narratives without drama. Leela's job wasn't to drum up confrontation, it was to reintroduce Eleanor Whitmore to the world as a person of agency. While paperwork moved, I focused on learning. I had lived my life in the rhythms of family and home. Finances had always been functional, never fascinating. Now I spent hours at Martin's firm studying balance sheets, learning about property trusts, and how to shield assets. Knowledge felt like armor. It was humiliating to admit that for years I had allowed others to speak for me in rooms where decisions were made. But humiliation turned quickly into appetite. I wanted to know, to understand, to be fluent in the language of money and contracts that had been used against me. There were moments when I surprised myself. I negotiated clauses in trust documents with a lawyer who had assumed I would leave the heavy thinking to him. I insisted on an irrevocable trust structure for a portion of my assets and a foundation that would be governed by a board including Martin and 2 independent trustees. "You're building a citadel," Michael said once, and for the first time I did not disagree. I also began to watch Christina from a distance, not in a voyeuristic way but as an intelligence officer studies terrain. I wanted facts, not fantasies. Friends who still had tenuous ties to her fed me fragments, arguments with Jason about money, a new habit of late-night spending, their move into a smaller town where creditors were less likely to find them quickly. It was ugly, but it was useful. Each fact clarified that what I had suspected, that they were counting on me and my presumed passivity, was true. But I did not become monstrous. I refused to weaponize humiliation. My revenge would not grind them into dust. It was too petty. My plan had to be more elegant: restore my dignity, preserve my legacy, and expose, softly and inevitably, the consequences of their choices. I wanted my daughter to face what she had lost without the world needing to orchestrate the catastrophe. Let her see, in the quiet light of day, the life she had chosen to discard. One small, practical move sent the first ripple. I changed the locks to the family home and installed a discreet security system that would log entries and notify the solicitor if any unauthorized attempt were made. The key exchange was performed by a locksmith accompanied by a notary. There would be no question about the legality of the action. Christina's fury at being locked out would be fruitless. Legally, she had no recourse. And the optics of a daughter breaking into her mother's home were not something I desired. I wanted the law on my side and the truth as quiet, immutable proof. At the same time, I cataloged. Every photograph on the walls, every piece of silver, every small heirloom was inventoried, photographed, and stored. The house was sold to a young family who promised to love it. That sale was both a practical solution and a moral statement. I wanted the memories to live in a place that would value them, not be liquidated for a payday. Selling the house hurt in a way I didn't anticipate. Those walls had held Anthony's laugh, a dozen holidays, 100 small consolations. But it was also freeing. The house had been a chain as much as a home when held hostage to others' expectations. Paradoxically, letting it go allowed me to reclaim my life. News travels in strange ways. Christina discovered some changes in a way I anticipated, not through tabloid headlines but through small betrayals of access. A blocked card, a call from a bank asking for verification, a locked door she expected to walk through. Her texts were furious. Her voice, when she finally called, had a brittle edge. "You can't do this," she cried. "I need you." I said nothing she could use. I spoke evenly. "I am not yours to spend, Christina. I am not an account number or a piece of property. I am your mother." There were days when loneliness sat on my shoulder like a heavy shawl. Revenge, even when clean and deliberate, is lonely work. I missed the warmth of an uncomplicated relationship with my child. Some nights I wondered if I had gone too far, but then something else came to me with the slow certainty of tide, the knowledge that I was teaching someone how to be accountable. It was not my duty to fix everything they had damaged. It was my duty to stand for myself and in doing so, perhaps to offer a model for stronger boundaries in a world that too often forgets them. The most unexpected ally in this process was a woman I met at a small charity luncheon. A retired school principal named Rose who had been abandoned by her only son. Her eyes were fierce under gentle lids. She had tales of small injustices turned into quiet rebellions, a son who reclaimed his own life when confronted with his mother's steady refusal to be used. We shared tea, and in that brief conversation I found not pity but partnership. Rose had organized a support group at the community center, and she invited me to speak. The idea of standing before people like me, sharing a hard-earned plan for reclaiming dignity, felt more like purpose than spectacle. By the end of the month, the bones of my new life were visible. Legal protections in place, assets secured, a plan for a foundation that would give voice to those without one, and a rhythm of study that made me dangerous in the best possible way, informed. I stopped being the person who waited to be rescued. I began to be the person who rescued herself. There was still the question of Christina, of what to do with the daughter who had hurt me so deeply. Time, I decided, would be part of the answer. I wanted space to watch whether her remorse would grow into responsibility, whether poverty would teach humility or harden excuses. But I also wanted to offer boundaries that could become bridges if she chose differently. So I wrote a letter, not to accuse but to set terms. No money, no access to accounts, no unpaid expectations. If she wanted reconciliation, she would have to show it through work and respect, not through words. The letter was delivered with quiet dignity. It was not a trap. It was an invitation to earn her way back, if she could. That night I slept with a small smile. I had not yet won everything. There would be legal skirmishes and nights of doubt. But I had begun to transform the narrative. In the end, I realized my best revenge might be the simplest thing, the reclamation of my own life. In the weeks that followed, I discovered something unexpected about revenge. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. It's the quiet shift when you stop chasing answers from those who hurt you and start building a life that makes their absence irrelevant. I moved into a new home, a stone villa on the edge of the Hudson River, where the mornings smelled of pine and the sunsets turned the water gold. It wasn't as large as the old family estate, but it was mine alone. I decorated it slowly, deliberately, pale ivory walls, French oak floors, tall windows draped in soft linen. Every corner reflected who I had become, simple, elegant, independent. The first night I slept there, I felt a kind of peace I hadn't known in years. I poured a glass of wine, lit a single candle, and looked out at the river. This, I whispered to myself, is freedom. I didn't tell Christina I had moved. She didn't deserve to know where I was rebuilding. I knew she was struggling. Friends whispered about their debts, about Jason's failed investments, about the small apartment they now rented downtown. Apparently, he'd started drinking more, blaming everyone but himself. I took no joy in it, but I can't pretend I didn't feel a certain satisfaction. Karma had its own rhythm, and I didn't need to interfere. My focus shifted elsewhere. One afternoon, I received an invitation from the Women's Business Association. They wanted me to speak about resilience after loss. My first instinct was to decline. I'd spent a lifetime keeping my private pain behind polished smiles. but something inside me said yes, maybe because I wanted to see what would happen if I turned my story into strength instead of shame. The day of the event, I dressed in a cream silk blouse and tailored trousers, the kind of outfit that made me feel unshakable. As I stood at the podium, dozens of faces looked up at me. Women from all walks of life waiting. I began to speak softly at first, then stronger about love that blinds you, about betrayal that strips you to your bones, and about the quiet power of starting over. I didn't name names, but I didn't need to. They understood. When I finished, the room was silent for a few seconds. Then applause broke out. Genuine, heartfelt applause. A few women had tears in their eyes. It hit me then. I wasn't just reclaiming my dignity. I was helping others reclaim theirs. After the speech, a local journalist approached me for an interview. That small article led to another invitation, and then another. Within months, I was doing guest talks, mentoring young women, and helping them navigate finances and self-worth. I had become, unintentionally, the very thing I'd needed when I was broken, a reminder that no matter how deep the betrayal, you can rise again. My revenge had transformed. It wasn't about destruction anymore. It was about evolution. But then, one evening, as the leaves outside began to turn gold with autumn, I got a call I never expected. "Mom." The voice was small, hesitant, almost childlike. It took me a moment to realize it was Christina. For a long time, I said nothing. Just listened to her breathing on the other end. "Jason left," she said finally. "Hey, he took what little we had and disappeared. I don't even know where he is." Silence. "I'm pregnant, Mom." The words hit me like a cold wave. Every instinct inside me wanted to rush to her, to wrap her in my arms and promise her everything would be okay. But another part of me, the part that had crawled out of betrayal and rebuilt her name from ashes, reminded me that compassion doesn't mean surrender. "I'm sorry, Christina," I said quietly. "That must be hard." Her voice broke. "I don't deserve your help, but I didn't know who else to call." She was right about the first part. She didn't deserve it. But I wasn't the same woman she had stolen from. I had learned how to help without being used again. "You need a safe place?" I asked. "Yes," she whispered. "Then you can come stay for a while, on my terms." She cried, hard, the kind of sob that comes from deep regret. When I ended the call, I sat there for a long while, staring at the flickering firelight. My heart ached, but it wasn't weakness. It was power tempered with grace. Revenge wasn't supposed to erase love. It was supposed to make you strong enough to give it without losing yourself again. That night, I prepared the guest room, not out of sentimentality, but out of resolve. I wasn't doing this because she was my daughter. I was doing it because I had learned how to set boundaries, how to give without being taken. The next morning, when Christina arrived, she looked different. Smaller somehow. Her once perfect hair was messy, her eyes hollow from sleepless nights. She stood on the porch, clutching her small suitcase, whispering, "Mom, I don't even know where to start." I looked at her for a long moment before stepping aside. "Start by coming in," I said. She did, slowly, nervously. The house seemed to swallow the sound of her footsteps, like it was holding its breath. I poured her tea, and for the first time in years, we sat face to face without lies between us. She told me everything. How Jason had manipulated her, how the money had disappeared, how shame had kept her from calling. She said she didn't expect forgiveness. I listened quietly. And when she finished, I said something that surprised even me. "Christina, I don't forgive you. Not yet. But I see you're finally facing what you ran from. That's a start." She nodded, tears spilling freely. "Thank you for letting me come home," she whispered. "This isn't home," I corrected gently. "This is where you can begin again, if you're ready to earn it." Her eyes met mine, and for the first time since she was a child, I saw honesty there. Broken, trembling honesty. That night, as she slept in the guest room, I stood by her door and watched her breathe, her hand resting over her small, growing belly. The years of anger, betrayal, and distance flickered like shadows in the candlelight, and for a fleeting second, I felt something that almost resembled peace. But deep inside, I also knew this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the middle. Because forgiveness is not the opposite of revenge. Sometimes, it's the most powerful form of it. The morning after Christina returned, the air in my home felt different, heavier, quieter. I moved through the kitchen with practiced calm, pouring coffee into 2 delicate porcelain cups. Across the counter, she sat silently, her hands wrapped around the mug like she was trying to draw warmth from it. For a while, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint whisper of the river outside. She finally broke the silence. "I know you don't owe me anything, Mom," she said softly, her eyes lowered. "But I want to fix this. Somehow." I watched her carefully. "Fixing something starts with understanding how you broke it." Her eyes filled, and I saw the same tears she'd cried as a child when she'd done something wrong. But this time they didn't move me in the same way. I'd learned too much about manipulation to confuse emotion with accountability. "I thought Jason loved me," she whispered. "He said you were controlling me, that you'd never let me live my own life. He said the only way we could be free was to take what was ours." "What was yours?" I repeated quietly, raising an eyebrow. "You mean mine?" She swallowed hard. "Yes, I see that now." I took a sip of coffee and leaned back in my chair. "You don't need to explain what Jason told you. You need to explain why you believed him over your own mother." Her voice broke. "Because I wanted to believe someone loved me for me. Not for what I came from." I stayed quiet, letting her words hang in the air. It was the first honest thing she'd said in years. After breakfast, I gave her a list of rules, simple but firm: no lies, no hidden calls from Jason, no money without discussion. She could stay as long as she followed them. She agreed without hesitation, though I could tell it stung her pride. Over the next few weeks, I watched her adjust to this quieter life. She helped with household chores, cooked occasionally, even joined me for evening walks by the river. But trust is not something you rebuild with chores. It's built with truth. And that was something we still hadn't faced. One night, as we sat by the fire, she asked a question that caught me off guard. "Do you ever regret having me?" The question burned in the air between us. I turned slowly to look at her. "Never. But I regret what I allowed to happen between us. I should have been stronger when you first started slipping away. I thought love alone could protect you from yourself." Her eyes welled up again. "And I thought I didn't need you. Turns out I did, just too late." There was a long silence. The fire crackled, throwing soft light over her face. She looked younger in that moment, fragile, like the little girl who used to fall asleep in my lap during thunderstorms. Then, softly, she whispered, "I want to earn your forgiveness, Mom. Tell me how." I stared into the flames. "You can't earn it," I said finally. "You can only live differently." The next morning, she surprised me. She offered to handle my event planning for an upcoming charity gala, something I'd been organizing with the Business Women's Network. It was a delicate project, and part of me hesitated, but I agreed. "This is your chance," I told her. "Show me who you are now." She threw herself into it, making calls, organizing decor, even meeting with sponsors. I watched quietly, waiting for any sign of old habits. And then one afternoon, I saw something that made my heart twist. She was on the phone, speaking softly, too softly. When she saw me, she hung up quickly, pretending it was nothing. My old instincts flared up. "Who was that?" I asked. She froze. "Just an old friend." I took a step closer. "Jason." She didn't answer, which was answer enough. I felt the same cold rush of betrayal that had haunted me years ago. My hands trembled slightly, but I kept my voice steady. "After everything I offered you," I said, "you're still letting him back in." Tears filled her eyes. "He said he's changed. He wants to be part of the baby's life." I thought maybe. "Stop." My voice was sharp, final. "He doesn't want a family. He wants control. The same thing you wanted from me once." She broke down, sobbing. "I don't know how to stop believing him." I looked at her, really looked. And for the first time, I realized that she wasn't cruel anymore. She was lost. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My anger warred with pity, my instinct to protect with my need for peace. I had spent years learning how to survive her betrayal. And now fate was testing whether I could rise above it. By morning, I'd made a decision. If she wanted to see who Jason truly was, I would let her. Not with words, but with truth. I called an old friend, a private investigator I'd once hired during the divorce of a client. Within days, he found what I needed: Jason's latest scam. He'd been using Christina's name to secure fraudulent loans. When I showed her the report, her hands shook. "He used my credit," she whispered. "Yes," I said quietly. "And if I hadn't checked, you'd have been legally responsible." She covered her mouth, sobbing uncontrollably. I didn't comfort her. I let the truth sink in. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone you love is stop protecting them from consequences. When she finally looked up at me, her voice was hoarse. I hate him. No, I said. You hate what you allowed him to turn you into. She cried harder. But this time, I saw something different in her tears. Not guilt. Clarity. For the first time in years, she saw the world as it really was. In that moment, I realized my revenge had come full circle. Not through punishment or anger, but through truth. The same truth she once refused to see now shattered her illusions and set her free. As she sat there, broken but awake, I felt something loosen inside me. The weight I'd carried for years, the resentment, the ache, began to dissolve. Sometimes victory doesn't look like triumph. It looks like peace. And peace, I was learning, could be its own form of revenge. The days that followed were strangely calm, as if the house itself had exhaled after years of holding its breath. Christina barely spoke. She spent most of her time in the garden, sitting beneath the old birch tree that overlooked the river. I'd often watch her from the window, her hands resting over her growing belly, her face turned toward the light as if trying to draw warmth from the world again. I didn't press her to talk. Some lessons can't be rushed. They settle slowly, like sediment at the bottom of a deep, cold lake. But little by little, I noticed changes. She stopped defending Jason. She stopped making excuses. She started reading again. Books about self-worth, finance, motherhood. She even asked if she could help with my foundation's next event. This time, I agreed without hesitation. I gave her real responsibilities, budgets, outreach, coordination. And to my quiet surprise, she didn't falter. She was organized, patient, even humble. When she made mistakes, she owned them. And when I offered advice, she listened without defensiveness. It was strange, seeing this version of her, softer, grounded. One afternoon, as we prepared invitations for a donor gala, she looked up from her laptop and said, "Mom, when you speak at these events, you always talk about rebuilding after betrayal. Does it ever stop hurting?" I looked at her for a long moment. No, it just changes shape. It becomes a scar. Something that reminds you of what you survived, not what you lost. She nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. I think I understand that now. That evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, we sat together on the porch, sharing quiet conversation. The distance that once defined us had softened into something gentler. Not forgiveness yet, but the faint outline of it. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel hope. Then one rainy afternoon, my lawyer called Eleanor. He said, his voice serious, "We've received a notice. Christina's name is still attached to one of Jason's fraudulent accounts. The bank needs to resolve it." My stomach sank. "How much?" "Almost 80,000. But there's more. He's tried to use your old business trust as collateral. He's been digging again." I felt that old, familiar chill, the echo of every betrayal. But this time I didn't panic. I wasn't the same woman he once blindsided. "Can we stop him?" I asked calmly. "Yes. With your permission, we can freeze all associated accounts and pursue legal action. It would also expose him publicly." I looked out the window where Christina sat knitting a small yellow blanket. My decision wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about closure. "Do it," I said, "and make sure his name is tied to every consequence." The next few weeks passed in quiet tension. Christina didn't know what was happening behind the scenes. I wanted her to focus on her child, not on another wave of chaos. Then, one morning, she came into the kitchen holding her phone, her face pale. "Mom," she whispered, "Jason's been arrested." I met her gaze. Good. Tears filled her eyes, but they weren't of sorrow, they were of relief. "I can finally breathe." She sank into a chair, trembling. "I can't believe I ever thought he loved me." I set down my cup and took a slow breath. We all mistake control for love at some point. The real test is whether you choose yourself once you see the truth. She looked at me, nodding through tears. "Thank you for protecting me, even when I didn't deserve it." Those words, simple, trembling, raw, undid something inside me. Years of bitterness softened into something else, not complete forgiveness, but understanding. Later that night, as I tucked a soft quilt over her sleeping form, I felt a faint kick beneath her belly. I rested my hand there, and for the first time, I let myself feel the fragile miracle of a second chance. Not just for her, but for us. The baby came early. A stormy night that filled the house with both panic and wonder. I drove her to the hospital through pounding rain, my heart thundering with fear. Hours later, when the first cries of my granddaughter filled the room, I felt something shift forever. Christina named her Grace. When she handed the baby to me, I hesitated, afraid of what that tiny heartbeat might awaken in me. But as I cradled Grace, her fingers curling around mine, something inside me broke open and healed at the same time. "She deserves better than we gave each other," Christina whispered.
"Yes,"
I said quietly, "and she'll have it." We stayed in that hospital room for hours, holding the baby between us like a fragile truce. In the weeks that followed, life began to move differently. Mornings were filled with the scent of milk and lavender, soft laughter echoing down the halls. The house, once so silent, now pulsed with new life. But every night, after they'd gone to bed, I'd sit by the window with my glass of wine, watching the moonlight ripple over the river, and think of everything that had led here: the lies, the heartbreak, the rage, and finally the peace. Revenge, I realized, isn't always fire. Sometimes it's a seed that grows into something stronger than hate. The quiet satisfaction of becoming whole while those who wronged you crumble under their own weight. Jason's arrest had closed the legal chapter, but the emotional one that was between me and Christina. And though I wasn't ready to call it forgiveness, I knew we were walking toward it, step by fragile step. The following spring was the most peaceful season of my life. The air smelled of lilacs, and sunlight danced over the river like gold dust. My home, once a silent fortress, now breathed with life. Grace's laughter filled the mornings, and the faint hum of Christina's voice singing her to sleep echoed through the halls like a melody from another time. Every morning, I'd walk into the garden with my cup of tea, watching the world wake. Sometimes Christina joined me, her daughter cradled against her chest. We didn't talk much about the past anymore. There was no need. The silence between us had transformed. It wasn't cold anymore. It was peaceful. But peace, I've learned, is fragile. It needs protection, not fear. I had rebuilt my life from ashes, and now I wanted to use it for something greater. The Women's Business Network invited me to headline their annual conference that year. This time, not just as a speaker, but as the keynote. My story had reached far beyond what I'd ever imagined. They called me the woman who turned betrayal into rebirth. As I stood backstage that night, listening to the audience murmuring beyond the curtain, I thought of every moment that had led here. The humiliation, the nights I cried alone, the slow climb back toward myself. Christina was in the front row, holding Grace. When our eyes met, I saw pride, not the shallow pride of vanity, but the quiet kind that comes from survival. I stepped up to the podium, took a deep breath, and began. "When someone you love betrays you?" I said, my voice calm but steady. "It doesn't just break your heart. It shatters the mirror you've used to see yourself. You stop recognizing who you are, until one day, you decide to rebuild the reflection with your own hands." The room fell silent. Every pair of eyes was on me. I was once a woman who thought love meant sacrifice. I continued. I gave everything, my money, my time, my trust, to people who mistook my kindness for weakness. But here's the truth: revenge doesn't always mean destruction. Sometimes, it means rebuilding your life so beautifully that those who broke you have to live with the sight of your strength. Applause began softly, then grew louder, a wave of sound that filled the hall. I smiled, not because of the praise, but because for the first time, I felt completely free of everything that had once chained me. After the event, Christina came up to me with tears in her eyes. "Mom, you were incredible." I took her hand gently. "You know, when you betrayed me, I thought it was the end of everything. But it was only the beginning. You forced me to find myself." She nodded, her lips trembling. "I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that forgiveness. Then start by being the kind of mother Grace can trust." I said softly, "That's all the redemption you'll ever need." She hugged me then, not like a child seeking comfort, but like a woman finally understanding the meaning of love. From that day on, we built something new. Not the old relationship filled with expectations and unspoken debts, but a quiet partnership built on truth. Grace grew fast, bright-eyed and curious. She loved my pearls, always trying to wrap them around her tiny neck, giggling as they slipped through her fingers. And sometimes, when I caught Christina watching me with her daughter, I saw both guilt and gratitude in her eyes. And maybe that's what forgiveness truly is, the ability to live with both. Months later, Jason's trial made headlines. His crimes caught up with him: fraud, embezzlement, identity theft. The court sentenced him to years in prison. Christina didn't attend, but I did. I sat in the back of the courtroom, quiet and composed, as he was led away in handcuffs. He saw me, and for a fleeting second the arrogance drained from his eyes. What he saw wasn't anger, it was indifference. That was my revenge. Not screaming, not gloating, just existing in peace he could never touch. When I walked out of that courthouse, the sky was blindingly blue. I lifted my face to the sun and let it warm my skin. The chapter was finally closed. That evening I hosted a small dinner at home. Close friends, a few of the women I'd mentored, and Christina, of course, with Grace in her arms. Laughter filled the rooms again. For the first time in years, the sound didn't feel like a lie. As the night wound down and the guests left, I stood by the window, watching the reflection of my life in the dark glass. My daughter smiling, my granddaughter asleep, the faint music of joy returning to a house that once knew only silence. I whispered to myself, this is what winning feels like. Because revenge isn't about making others suffer. It's about becoming untouchable, not by wealth or pride, but by peace. So if you're listening to my story, remember this. Don't waste your pain trying to destroy those who hurt you. Use it to build the life they'll never have the strength to imagine. That's the truest revenge there is. If you felt my story, don't forget, real revenge isn't loud. It's graceful. It's the moment you walk away stronger, calmer, and free. Subscribe for more stories like mine, because sometimes the sweetest payback is peace,